This presentation is on international non-governmental organizations, or INGOs. INGOs are nonprofit organizations with no government affiliation. The only difference between an NGO and an INGO is that an INGO has an international rather than only domestic presence. INGOs are usually established with the intention of providing some sort of relief or aid in countries around the world experiencing a sudden or chronic state of crisis. For example, a lack of food, natural disasters, human rights issues, or extreme prevalence of HIV/AIDS or other communicable diseases. The creation of INGOs seems to date back to about the 1800s when it became apparent that disparities around the world couldn't always be resolved within a country, and external resources were necessary. Historically, INGOs played a major role in the abolishment of slavery and women's rights movements around the world, as well as the provision of aid during World War II. Throughout history, well-known INGOs such as Amnesty International and the American Red Cross have received praise for their work. In fact, both organizations are recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize. In general, INGOs are often credited for responding to the social demands of nations much quicker than their own governments. According to the Global Journal, in 2015, the U.S. ranked the highest in the number of ranked INGOs, making up 26% of all INGOs in the world, some of those ranking amongst the top 10% most influential. In the past 20 years, the presence of INGOs has increased by 500% in some countries. Unfortunately, in this case, quantity doesn't always mean quality. I think this artwork is depicting the overwhelming number of organizations attempting to address one issue. Speculations have risen about whether this increase in the number of NGOs is correlated to a greater need, the involvement of social media, or the discovery that nonprofit work is ironically a very profitable industry. In this picture, you see a line of NGOs attempting to milk from the quote-unquote cash cow of AIDS funding being distributed. The hypothetical cash cow in the previous picture is referring to funding. Like most nonprofit organizations, funding often comes from donors or government agencies, although INGOs are considered non-governmental. This can be problematic because political agendas have been known to be associated with monetary donations. Enter corruption. The same organization that received the honor of the Nobel Peace Prize, the American Red Cross, was under scrutiny for receiving $500,000 in donations for Haiti and only built 6 homes. Some sources who interviewed Haitian residents stated that much of the money was spent on outsourcing organizations to build the homes. The American Red Cross seems to have denied the claim, but has not provided any proof to combat it. A more covert version of corruption presents itself in the form of rent seeking, which describes the practice of attempting to earn more money than was lost in overhead cost. Organizations presenting as INGOs use that platform to increase wealth. Sometimes INGOs do this in the form of resource exploitation. Another funding issue lies in the trickle-down method of circulating resources. In this picture, you see funding being pumped from an unknown resource to the donor, to the INGO, to the NGO, to the local NGO, and lastly, to the population they intended to serve in the first place. As you see, the resources decrease in size as it gets funneled through the system. When you get a chance, check out this documentary, Poverty Inc. on Netflix. It talks about issues with INGOs, some based out of the United States, and their efforts that actually harmed international economies more than they helped. For example, Tom Shoes had this idea to donate a pair of shoes with every purchase of a Tom shoe. While this sounds like an awesome idea, The unintended consequence was that local cobblers in those countries went out of business. Free items are not always the answer to developing economies, especially when the local economy thrives off of the production of the items being donated. Similarly, the documentary reviews how Bill Clinton attempted to boost the U.S. economy by forcing Haiti to lower taxes on imported rice from Arkansas. Whether unintentionally or not, low cost imported rice killed Haiti's ability to produce rice and, in some sense, contributed to Haiti's inability to become economically self sufficient and prepared for natural disasters. Another great resource to check out is Killing with Kindness by author Mark Schiller. In his book, he investigates NGOs in Haiti and their international partners. His review of the lateral structure of NGOs is thought provoking to say the least. In his evaluation, he also touches on the concept of paternalism, which is the practice of resource donors regulating recipients' actions or choices as a condition of their assistance. The concept is that the more economically well off party would know how to best manage the resources, which is obviously not conducive to encouraging self sufficiency. This artwork illustrates how governments or other funding sources often have a wealth of resources but give unwanted leftovers. This is also an act of paternalism in the sense that true community development would involve equitable cycling of resources. Paternalism also involves enforcing dominant cultural or social beliefs. The woman on the left is a depiction of someone you'd find in a possibly Western society. She's saying, everything covered but her eyes. What a cruel, male dominated culture. Alternatively, the woman on the right, who possibly belongs to a more conservative religion, is saying, nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel, male dominated culture. In some countries where forms of female genital cutting takes place, NGOs with Western origins push to outlaw the practice. Some literature suggests that this created a lot of cultural tension because the women of that region had voluntarily undergone genital cutting and only wished to implement laws regulating the age at which women undergo the procedure. Also, the women of the region could not understand how Western cultures could promote breast augmentation, which is a form of genital mutilation, but condemn forms of genital mutilation found in their culture. Although issues involving NGOs are vast, there's no doubt that a large percentage of these organizations were created out of genuine altruism. But rather than contributing our efforts to creating yet another NGO that we imagine will be bigger and better, perhaps our efforts would be best spent in revamping existing systems that contribute to the current problem.